They put me in that home on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesday was the day Eleanor and I did the grocery run, 41 years running, and now I was sitting in a vinyl chair that smelled like somebody else's medicine, watching my son sign papers about my life across a desk I had never seen before. Welcome back to The Forgotten Parent. Grab your coffee, get comfortable, and remember the people in these stories had every chance to do right by the ones who raised them. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to want to stay till the end. My name is Harold Bennett. I am 68 years old, and for 43 of those years I ran Bennett Tool and Die out of a brick building on the east side of Dayton, Ohio. I drive a 1994 Ford F-150 that my son keeps offering to take off my hands, like it's a burden, and not the truck that hauled the first lathe we ever owned. I still fill the same dented green thermos with black coffee every morning out of habit. Even on the mornings there is nowhere I need to be. I am not a complicated man. I built things. I paid my people before I paid myself. And every night for 43 years, I came home to Eleanor. If you passed me in the hardware store, you would hold the door, and you would think nothing else of me. That is exactly the way I have always preferred it. Here is the thing about being underestimated. It is the most comfortable coat a man can wear. Nobody asks anything of the quiet old fellow in the flannel shirt. Nobody watches him. And a man nobody is watching can see absolutely everything. I started Bennett Tool and Die in 1981 with a $4,000 loan, one second-hand lathe, and a handshake from a banker named Cyril Voss, who told me to my face that he did not expect to see the money again. I paid Cyril back in 26 months. For the first 2 years, I ran the whole operation out of a rented bay with a roof that leaked onto the machines every time it rained. And there was one stretch the winter of '83 where I paid my 2 employees every Friday for 9 weeks straight before I paid myself a single dollar. Eleanor knew. She never said one word about the grocery budget. She just quietly started stretching one chicken across 3 dinners, and when I finally caught on and tried to apologize, she looked at me and said, "Harold, you are not allowed to feel guilty for building something. Now eat." That was Eleanor. She believed in what I was making before there was anything to point at. By the time our son was grown, Bennett Tool and Die employed 61 people, and that brick building on the east side was paid off, free and clear. Last spring, an outfit from Cincinnati offered me $6.2 million for it. I told them no. Not because the number was wrong, but because some things a man builds with his own 2 hands are not for selling, and because a man ought to know the difference between what he owns and what owns him. My son Grant runs the company now. Or he believes he does. He has the corner office with my name on the door, the title on his business cards, and a wife named Sloan, who refers to my late wife's china as the stuff in the cabinet. Eleanor picked out every piece of that china across 30 years, one place setting at a time, on anniversaries and birthdays, and a couple of ordinary Tuesdays when she just wanted something beautiful. When Sloan called it the stuff in the cabinet, I smiled and said nothing. I have learned that the most useful thing a man can do, very often, is nothing at all. At least for a while. I gave Grant that corner office 3 years ago, the week the doctors first said the word cancer out loud about Eleanor. I did not want to be in a boardroom while my wife was in an examination room. So I handed my son the keys, the title, and the day-to-day. And I let the whole world believe what it wanted to believe, that old Harold had finally stepped aside, that the boy was in charge now, that the company had passed from one generation to the next the way these things are supposed to pass. What I did not hand him, what I never signed, not on any Tuesday, in any office, on any piece of paper anywhere on this earth, was the company itself. or the deed to the house on Larchmont Street. Those two things stayed exactly where they had been since 2009, in a fireproof drawer in the office of a man named Howard Beck. But I am getting ahead of myself. Grant didn't know that yet. Sloane especially didn't know that. And that gap, the gap between what they believed and what was true, is the whole of this story. Eleanor passed on a Thursday morning in October, with my hand in hers and the window open the way she liked it. I will not spend your time on that part. Some grief is not for strangers, and some is not even for telling. I will only say that I had been married for 41 years, and then I was not, and the house on Larchmont went so quiet I could hear the refrigerator running from the bedroom. We buried her on a Saturday. Grant gave a reading. He cried, and I believed those tears, and I still do. Whatever came after, I do believe my son loved his mother. The trouble in this family was never that Grant had no heart. The trouble was that he had married a woman who knew exactly how to use it. 3 days after the funeral, 3 days. I had not even taken my black tie to the cleaners. Sloane came to the house with a leather folder and a fountain pen, and a voice so soft and so patient you would have thought she was talking to a frightened animal. "Harold," she said, sitting across from me at Eleanor's kitchen table, "we just want to make everything easier for you. You shouldn't have to worry about any of this anymore." She slid a piece of paper across the table, a power of attorney, granting my son and his wife authority over my house, my accounts, my affairs. And at the bottom, on the signature line, was my name, in my handwriting, signed and dated, except I had never seen that document before in my life. I want to tell you what I felt, looking at my own signature on a page I had never signed, and I want to be honest about it, because I promised you the true story. It was not rage. Rage is loud, and rage is stupid, and rage would have ruined everything. What I felt was a cold, clean quiet, the same quiet I used to feel on a job site the moment before I told a crew to stop everything and back away from a wall I knew was about to come down. The quiet of a man who has just seen the whole shape of a thing all at once. I looked at that beautiful forgery for a long moment. Then I looked at my son, standing by the counter, studying his shoes like they owed him an explanation. And I looked at Sloane, with her patient little smile already in place, waiting for me to be grateful. "Where do I sign?" I said. "Because here is what 43 years of business teaches you. You never let a man know you have seen the trap. You let him believe his trap is working. A trap a man trusts is a trap you can walk him into." So I let Sloane believe. The home was called Cedar Pines. There were no cedars and there were no pines. There was a parking lot, a lobby that smelled like carpet shampoo and cream of mushroom soup, and a recreation board on the wall that promised bingo at 4 and armchair travel at 6. They gave me a room with a window that looked out on the dumpsters and a vinyl chair the color of a bruise. My son signed the intake papers. Sloane handled the deposit. They told the nice young woman at the desk that I had been having some confusion since my wife passed, and that it was safer this way, and they said it in front of me, the way you talk about a dog at the vet. There was a man down the hall named Gus, 81 years old, a retired pipefitter, and he had decided on my very first night to make me his personal project. Over the cream of mushroom dinner, Gus told me there were only 2 rules a man needed to survive a place like this. Rule 1, never miss bingo, because the activities coordinator keeps a list, and the list matters more than you would ever believe. Rule 2, and Gus leaned in for this one, whatever they tell your family about you, son, you tell it right back about them to anybody who'll listen. Because in here, the story is the only thing you've got left. Gus had no idea how right he was. I lost at bingo every single afternoon for 3 weeks. I also learned from the orderlies in the front desk and the kind woman who pushed the medication cart exactly how a person gets placed in a home like Cedar Pines, exactly what signatures it takes, and exactly how easy it is to make a grieving old man look confused when the people doing the talking are his own family and the old man is too well-mannered to make a scene. And the longer I sat in that bruise-colored chair, the more I understood that none of this had begun with the folder on Eleanor's kitchen table. I thought back over the last long year of my wife's illness, and the pieces I had been too heartbroken to assemble finally clicked into place. Sloan, asking with such gentleness whether Eleanor and I had gotten our affairs in order. Sloan, offering to help organize the study the very week Eleanor came home from her last round of treatment. Sloan, who had spent one whole Thanksgiving asking my son, just loud enough for me to catch it, whether his father was really still sharp enough to be running things. She had not improvised any of this in her grief. She had been circling the house for a year the patient, unhurried way certain birds circle a thing before it has quite finished dying. They kept calling it a care home. Funny thing, in the 3 weeks I lived there, not one single person in that building ever once cared for me. My granddaughter did that. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. I did not fight it. I want you to understand that, because it matters. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I did not call a single soul to complain. I unpacked my one suitcase. I set my green thermos on the windowsill, and every morning I filled it with the watery coffee from the lobby urn, and I sat in that bruise-colored chair, and I thought. Thinking is free. They could take my house and my dignity and my Tuesday grocery runs, but the one thing nobody at Cedar Pines could take was the 43 years I had spent learning exactly how money moves, exactly how paper works, and exactly what happens to people who forge a signature in the state of Ohio. The first crack in their plan was my granddaughter, Emma. Emma is Grant's daughter. She is 26, she teaches 3rd grade, and she has her grandmother's eyes and her grandmother's way of going very still when something is wrong. She came to visit me on my 4th day at Cedar Pines, and she sat in the other chair, and she held my hand, and she did not say any of the soft, patient things her stepmother said. She just looked at me for a long time, and then she said, "Grandpa, this isn't right, and I think you know it isn't right, and I don't think you're confused at all. I have been underestimated by experts. It is a rare and wonderful thing to be seen." I asked Emma to do one small thing for me. I asked her not to mention our conversation to her father or to Sloan, and I asked her the next time she was near the house on Larchmont to take a photograph of anything that seemed out of place. She called me that same night. Her voice was shaking. "Grandpa," she said, "there's a sign in the yard. The house is for sale. It's listed online. $740,000. The description says, she stopped. It says, motivated estate sale. Bring all offers. Estate sale. As though I were already dead. As though the man sitting in the bruise-colored chair drinking lobby coffee were a closed account, a thing to be liquidated, a cabinet full of stuff. I thanked Emma. I told her not to worry. I told her to go to bed. And then I sat in the dark of that little room, and I did not feel rage, and I did not feel despair. I felt the cold, clean quiet, and underneath it, for the first time since Eleanor died, I felt something that was almost like purpose. Because Sloan had made one mistake. She had been so busy forging the locks on the house that she never once checked who actually owned the building. If you've made it this far, do me one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of folks watch every minute of these and never do, and it costs you nothing, and it means everything to a channel like this one. Thank you. Genuinely. Now let me tell you about Howard Beck. Howard Beck has been my attorney for 30 years. His office is on the 3rd floor of a building downtown that has not been renovated since the Carter administration, and that is exactly how Howard likes it. Because Howard believes that a lawyer who spends money making his office look impressive is a lawyer who needs to impress you. And a lawyer who needs to impress you is a lawyer who is not certain of his work. Howard has never in his life been uncertain of his work. I could not exactly drive my F-150 out the front door of Cedar Pines. But there is no rule against a man's attorney visiting him, and there is no rule that says they cannot speak privately, and so on my 6th day, Howard Beck signed the visitor's log as family attorney, sat down in Emma's chair, opened a battered leather briefcase, and laid my entire life out on the little laminate table between us. "Harold," he said, "tell me everything, and don't leave out the parts you think don't matter." So I did. The folder, the forged power of attorney, Cedar Pines, the sign in the yard, the listing, Sloane's patient little voice. Howard listened the way he always listens, which is to say without a single change of expression, taking notes in the small, careful handwriting of a man who has spent 30 years making sure that what he writes down can be read aloud in a courtroom. When I finished, he set down his pen. "Let me make sure I understand," he said. "They have listed a house for sale that they believe they control through a power of attorney that you say you never signed." "That's right." "Harold." He almost smiled. "Do you remember what we did in 2009? I did remember. In 2009, the year the whole economy was coming apart at the seams and good companies were folding all around us, Eleanor and I had sat in Howard's outdated office and done a very quiet, very boring, very thorough piece of estate planning. We had placed the deed to the house on Larchmont and 100% of the ownership of Bennett Tool and Die into a trust that Howard Beck administered, a trust that had never been altered, never been transferred, never been so much as photocopied without my signature, my real signature, in 30 years. When I handed Grant the company 3 years ago, I handed him the title of Chief Executive. I handed him the office and the cards and the authority to run the place. I never handed him a single share, because there were no shares to hand him. He had been running, with great confidence, a company he did not own a thread of. The salary that paid for Sloane's car and Sloane's clothes and Sloane's opinions about my wife's china was signed every 2 weeks, out of a company that belonged entirely to the old man in the bruise-colored chair. "The house," Howard said, "cannot be sold by Grant or Sloane. They have no authority over it. The deed is held in trust, and the trust is held by me, and the trustee is and has always been you. Any sale they attempt is void. Any buyer they find is buying air. And the power of attorney?" Howard's expression changed then, just slightly, the way still water changes when something moves underneath it. "Harold," he said, "a forged power of attorney is not a family disagreement. It is a felony. And if it was notarized," he tapped the copy Emma had photographed for me, "then we are going to take a very close look at that notary stamp. Because a fraudulent notarization is its own separate crime, and it tends to leave a name and a license number sitting right there at the bottom of the page, like a man who robbed a bank and signed the guest book on the way out." It took Howard's investigator 4 days. The notary stamp on the power of attorney that bore my forged signature belonged to a license that had been revoked 2 years earlier. The notarization had never legally happened. The document was not merely false. It was provably, criminally false, with a paper trail leading directly back to whoever had paid to have it stamped. I will tell you something now that I have told no one, because I promised you the true story, and the true story includes the parts that do me no credit. There was a night, somewhere in the middle of all this, when I very nearly let the whole thing go. It was late, and the home was dark and quiet, and I was 68 years old and tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep, the particular exhaustion of a man who has buried his wife and been betrayed by his only child in the same gray month. And I sat in that chair, and I thought, you have enough. Let Howard quietly unwind the sail, take back the house, change the locks, and never speak to either of them again. Walk away clean. Spare yourself the courtroom and the ugliness of it. For about an hour that night, easier sounded like the wisest thing in the world. Then Emma came the next morning, and she was carrying Eleanor's recipe box. She had rescued it from the house before Sloane could pack it away with the stuff in the cabinet. I opened it there in that little room, and inside, in my wife's careful handwriting, were 40 years of Sunday dinners. And tucked behind the card for her pot roast was a note she had written me once, and I had long forgotten. Harold, you are not allowed to feel guilty for building something. I read it twice, and I understood that walking away would not be mercy. It would be cowardice wearing mercy's coat. Sloane had not only come for my house, she had come for the proof that my whole quiet life had ever amounted to anything at all, and that I would not let her take. I closed the recipe box. I called Howard, and I told him we were going all the way to the closing table. But going all the way to the closing table meant holding every card back until the one morning it would land hardest, which meant, for now, doing nothing at all. Howard did not like that. Lawyers never like waiting. It goes against the grain of the whole profession. But I had spent 43 years learning that the difference between getting even and getting it right is almost always patience. And I was not going to spend the best card I had ever been dealt 1 minute before the moment it would do the most good. When is the closing? I asked him. Howard checked his notes. They've accepted an offer. Full asking. Cash buyer. The closing is scheduled for the 22nd, 10 in the morning, at Sentinel Title on Far Hills Avenue. The 22nd, 9 days away. Howard, I said, I think I'd like to attend my own estate sale. The morning of the 22nd was cold and bright. Emma signed me out of Cedar Pines for what the front desk believed was a doctor's appointment. I wore my good gray jacket, the one Eleanor bought me, and I brought the green thermos full of real coffee, the kind that does not come from a lobby urn. Emma drove. We did not say much. Outside Sentinel Title, Howard Beck was waiting on the sidewalk with his battered briefcase and a manila envelope, and beside him stood a man I did not recognize. Harold, Howard said. This is David Park. Mr. Park is the buyer. David Park shook my hand. He was a real estate developer, calm and direct, the kind of man who has signed a great many contracts and read every one of them. Mr. Bennett, he said, I'll be honest with you. When your attorney called me last night, I almost didn't believe him, but I had my own people pull the title this morning. He shook his head slowly. The property's held in a trust. Your trust. The people I've been negotiating with for 3 weeks never had the standing to sell me a mailbox, let alone a house. I don't know what's going on inside your family, sir, and it's not my business. But I'm not buying a lawsuit. I'm here to watch the bottom fall out of this, and then I'm going to go buy a house from someone who actually owns one. I liked David Park immediately. We walked in together. The closing room at Sentinel Title had a long table and bad fluorescent light and a window that looked out on the parking lot. Grant was already there in a suit. Sloane was beside him in a cream-colored blazer with a folder of her own and that patient little smile, and a closing agent was laying out documents, and there was a pen. The same kind of fountain pen Sloane had slid across Eleanor's kitchen table, and for one moment nobody saw me standing in the doorway. Then Grant looked up, and the color left my son's face the way water leaves a sink when you finally pull the plug all at once, and going somewhere you cannot follow. Dad, he said, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be at Cedar Pines, I said, drinking the coffee. Yes, I know what I'm supposed to be doing, son. I've known for 3 weeks. Sloane recovered faster than Grant. I will give her that. Her smile flickered and then came right back, and she said, in that soft, patient voice, Harold, you really shouldn't be here. You're not well. Let me call someone to take you back, Sloane, I said. I'm going to ask you to stop talking now, not to be unkind. Just because everything you say from this point forward is going to make your morning considerably worse. And then Howard Beck set his briefcase on the table and opened it and went to work. He laid the documents down one at a time, the way a man lays down a winning hand, slowly, so everyone at the table can read each card as it falls. The original deed to the house on Larchmont, held in trust since 2009. The trust documents naming me and only me as the owner and trustee. The ownership records of Bennett Tool and Die 100% undivided, mine. And then, last, set down gently in the center of the table where the fluorescent light caught it. The investigator's report on a power of attorney bearing a forged signature and a notary stamp from a license revoked 2 years before the ink was dry. The closing agent stopped moving. David Park leaned back in his chair and folded his arms with the air of a man who had bought a ticket to a very good show. The room went so quiet I could hear the parking lot through the window. Grant stared at the papers. Dad, he said, and his voice had gone small, gone young. The voice he used to use when he was 8 years old and had broken something he wasn't supposed to touch. Dad, I didn't know about the notary. I swear to God, I believe you, I said. And I did. That was the thing about my son. He was not the architect of this. He was just weak enough to be useful to someone who was. Sloane, look at me. She looked at me. The patient smile was finally completely gone, and what was underneath it was the thing I had seen at Eleanor's kitchen table without quite letting myself name it. You forged my signature 3 days after I buried my wife, I said. You put me in a home and told strangers I was confused so that no one would believe me when I said otherwise. You listed the house Eleanor and I built our whole life inside of, and you called it an estate sale, as though I were already in the ground beside her. I set the green thermos down on the table, gently, the way you set down something that matters. Do you know what your mistake was? It wasn't greed. Greed I could almost understand. Your mistake was thinking that a quiet man is an empty one. You looked at me and you saw a closed account. You should have looked at who signs your husband's paycheck. I let that sit for a moment. Bennett Tool and Die has never belonged to Grant. It has belonged every single day to me. The salary that buys your car comes out of my company. And as of this morning, Howard has the paperwork for that too. Howard placed the last document on the table. For a long moment, nobody said a word. The closing agent very carefully capped her pen and set it down, the way you set down a tool the instant you realize the job has completely changed. Sloane looked at the documents, then at Grant. And then, this is the part I will always remember, she looked at the door. The quick, involuntary glance of a person calculating whether there is still a way out of the room. There was not. It was David Park who finally broke the silence. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and said, to no one in particular, well, I came here to buy a house. Instead, I believe I just watched one get stolen back. He shook my hand on his way out and told me to call him when I had something I actually wanted to sell. I told him I would keep his number. I meant it. I will tell you how it ended, because I promised you the true story, and the true story does not end with a man screaming across a closing table. It ended quietly, the way the important things do. Sloan faced criminal charges. Forgery of a legal instrument and fraudulent notarization are not family squabbles. They are felonies, and the state of Ohio does not require my forgiveness to prosecute them. I did not ask the prosecutor to go easy, and I did not ask him to go hard. I simply handed over what was true and let the law do the job the law exists to do. There is a kind of justice that does not need your anger to function. It only needs your patience and the truth, and I had brought both. My son was a different matter. Grant did not go to a courtroom. Grant came to Cedar Pines the next morning to sign me out, this time for good, and he stood in the doorway of that little room, looking at the green thermos on the windowsill. And he could not get a single word out. So I said it for him. You still have a job on Monday, I told him. Not because you've earned it. Because you're my son, and because your mother would never have forgiven me if I threw you away over the worst thing the worst person in your life ever talked you into. But you are going to spend a long time earning back a name you very nearly sold for a cream-colored blazer. We start Monday, 8 o'clock. Bring coffee. He nodded. He couldn't speak. That was all right. We had time. I moved back into the house on Larchmont that afternoon. Emma helped me carry my one suitcase up the porch steps, and she stayed the weekend. And on Sunday morning, I filled the green thermos with real coffee, and we sat on the back porch where Eleanor and I used to sit. And we didn't say much, and we didn't need to. They called me the forgotten parent. They put me in a chair the color of a bruise and listed my whole life at $740,000, motivated, bring all offers. And here is the only thing I would want you to carry out of this story, if you carry anything at all. Forgetting someone and underestimating someone are two very different mistakes. You can recover from forgetting a person. You simply remember them again. But underestimating a quiet man who has spent his whole life building things with his own two hands, that is the one mistake the world does not give back. Eleanor would have told me I was being dramatic. She would have been right. Then she would have poured herself a cup from the green thermos and smiled and said, "Finish your coffee, Harold." So I did. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being part of this family.